Hey designers, this is Kristen from Cut File Classroom, where I share tips and tutorials for designing and selling SVG cut files for use with Cricut, Silhouette, and other craft cutting machines. In this video, I'm going to show how to create this type of shadow text design in Adobe Illustrator. First, I'll show how to create this version with a rounded offset, and then I'll show how to create this other version with a sharp angular offset. If you want to follow along, I've included a link below where you can download this Illustrator practice file, which includes the completed design along with the same color palette I used. I'll also include links to this fun retro font, which is called De Augusta. First, I'll just move these completed designs off to the side so I have a clean artboard to work with. Then I'll press T on my keyboard to bring up the type tool, and I'll click and start typing the word that I want to use. I think this looks a little bit plain, so if I just click and highlight over the first letter, I can see the alternate letters that are included with this font. I like this first one, so I'm going to click it, and now we can see it's been applied to our text. I'm going to do the same with the letter K, and this time I'm going to choose this K here. I think that looks good, and I already think that looks so much better, so I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, and now I'm ready to convert this text into vector shapes. Before I do that, I always like to create a copy of my live text over to the side of the workspace in case I need to come back to it later. So I'm going to press Alt on my keyboard as I click and drag this text over to the side of the workspace. So now I can convert this text into vector shapes. So on my keyboard, I'm going to press Command or Control, Shift, O, and that's going to change my live text into vector shapes. Now we can see that some of these letters are overlapping, which we don't want for cut files. So I'm going to head over to the Pathfinder window. If you don't have it, you can head up to Windows and choose Pathfinder. And then in the Pathfinder panel, I'm going to click Unite. That has combined these overlapping letters so that they all form a single shape. So I'm going to give this a pretty color, and I'm just going to right click and choose Simplify to clean up some of the anchor points. For Simplify, I usually like to keep the Simplify curve in the 90s and then the corner point threshold in the 140s, and those settings typically work for most of the designs that I do, so I'm going to retain my latest settings checked and click OK. Now I'm ready to create the offset that's going to go around this text. So I'll come up to the top and click Object, Path, Offset Path, and now we see this is set to 0.15 inches with round joins. Yours might say miter by default, so you just click on here and change it to round. You can keep the miter limit at 4 and click OK. So now we have our offset created, and I'm going to give it a darker color so we can see it against our original text. And I'm going to come back over to Pathfinder and click Unite. And that combines all of those separate offsets to be a singular shape. And then I'm going to press Command or Control plus Shift left bracket key to send them to the back so they're behind the other letters. Now with the offset still selected, I'm going to grab the Group Selection tool, and I'll hold Shift as I click on just the outline of each of these offsets. And that's going to deselect them and leave these little inner bits selected so I can delete them because I don't want them to be a part of my design. When we created the offset, it formed a group with the original text, so I can double click to isolate this group, and now I can select just the offset text. So now I'm going to simplify again, and the settings from last time are still there, and we can see how much this has cleaned up the anchor points. So I'm going to click OK. And now I can make a copy of this offset to start forming my shadow. So I'm going to press Alt on my keyboard, and I'm going to click and drag the offset, and I'm just going to drop it off right there. And now I can head over to the tool panel and grab the Blend tool. Now I'm going to click once on the original offset and then once on the copy I made. And the Blend tool is going to create a copy in between. At this point, we only have one copy, so I'm going to double click on the Blend tool, and I'm going to choose Specified Steps, and we can see it's set to make only one copy. So I'm going to bump this up to 6 and adjust my preview, and we can see that looks a little bit better, but I can still see some waves in there, so I'm going to bump this up again to 8. And when I adjust my preview, I can see it looks a lot smoother. We still have some wiggles in there, but it's not going to be a problem in this case, so I'll click OK. The thing I like about blends is that now I can select that bottom copy and drag it around and play with the positioning of this shadow until I get it the way that I like it. Once I get the shadow in a position where I like it, I'll need to expand it so it can work with cutting machines. So I'll click Object, Blend, Expand, and now that has expanded the design. And if we zoom in, we can see all of those 8 copies that are in here. Now this would be a complete nightmare for a cutting machine to handle, so I need to combine all of these copies into a single shape. So I'm going to come back over to Pathfinder and choose Unite. So now that has combined all of those copies into a single shadow shape. But we still have a lot of extra anchor points here. So we're going to come back and choose Simplify. And this time our previous settings are still leaving quite a bit of anchor points. So I'm going to adjust this Simplify Curve threshold, and I'm just going to bring it down a little bit until those lines have cleaned up a little bit more. So I think that looks good. I'm going to click OK, and that's it for this type of shadow text. For the other type of design, to create a shadow text that has sharp corners and angles, it's similar but a little bit trickier. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Type tool, and I'm going to change my font to more blocky letters. I'm just going to go with Arial Black. It's a very basic blocky font. And I'm going to type the word that I want to use. And I need to convert these to vector shapes, but first I'm going to make a copy off to the side. So I'll press Alt as I click and drag to make a copy of that text. And now I can press Command or Control Shift O on my keyboard, and that converts this text into outlines. So now I'm going to simplify this text, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'll click OK. And I'm going to give this text a nicer color. And now I can create an offset to start building the shadow. You don't need to create an offset. You can just do the shadow text off of the letters as they are, but I like the way that the offset looks. So I'm going to head up to Object, Path, Offset Path. And this time I'm going to change the joins from round to miter. And let me just take a look, and I think that looks good, so I'm going to click OK. I'm going to give this offset a darker color. I'm going to click Unite in the Pathfinder panel to make it all one shape, and then I'll press Command or Control Shift left bracket key to send that to the back behind the original text. Once again, I'm going to go to Simplify and just make sure that the nodes are simplified as much as possible. And now I can make a copy of the offset to start building my shadow. So I'm going to press Alt as I click and drag to make a copy of that offset. And I'm just going to place it right there. And I'll come back to the Blend tool, click on the first offset, and then click on the second offset. And once again, it's created a singular copy in the middle. Now we need to double click on the Blend tool to bring up the blend options again. And this time, instead of specified steps, we're going to choose specified distance. And that's going to create many, many, many copies between our original shapes at a specified distance. The default distance that's included here, we can see, has lots of jagged edges just from all of those copies, since these are sharp angular letters, and we don't want that. We want a more smooth transition. So I'm going to change this to 0.005, which has worked for me, and I'll toggle my preview to see how that's going to look, and we can already see it's a much smoother transition. So I'm going to click OK. Once again, I can click on the bottom copy, and I can drag this around, and I can kind of play with the positioning of it to get the shadow text to be where I want it. Another cool thing that I like to do is, if you drag straight down, if you use the selection tool and click on just the bottom copy, and then press Alt and Shift as you click on one of these bottom corner handles and just drag inward, you can shrink down this word, as it blends from the smaller word to the bigger word, it's going to make it look like more of a 3D popping out effect, which is really cool. You can also drag it down to make a really long shadow. The only thing with this is that it's going to depend on your computer's processing power and RAM and all of that good stuff to render this correctly, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. My computer is on the older side, so I'm just going to drag this up and I'm going to go with a less dramatic shadow, and I like the way that looks. So now I'm ready to turn this blend into actual vector shapes. So I can come up to Object, Blend, Expand, and now we see this big old mess of vector shapes. And if I zoom way in, we can see that there's still lots of little steps here. There's still jagged edges here because these are all of the copies that were in this blend. So now you're going to see what I mean by the processing power, because obviously this would be terrible for cutting machines, so we need to combine all of these copies into a single shape. So I'm heading over to Pathfinder and I'm going to click Unite, and this is where your computer's processing power will come into play. Like I said, my computer is pretty old, so this usually takes a little bit for my computer to handle. Hopefully yours makes a quicker job of it. But once it's all done uniting everything, you're going to have one single shape for your shadow. And here we have lots and lots of extra nodes because we still have all of these steps from each of the copies that we made. To clean that up, Simplify isn't going to quite cut it just yet, so we need to come over to the Smooth tool, which is hiding under the Pencil tool in the tool panel. So I'll click the Smooth tool, and then I'm going to double click to bring up the Smooth tool options, and I'm going to make sure that the fidelity is set all the way on the left to accurate, and click OK. Now I can click just once on the outer edge of anywhere on this shadow shape, just one click, and it's going to clean up the edges of that shape. And it has drastically reduced the amount of anchor points there. So now I can use Simplify and just clean it up a little further. So I'm going to bump up this corner point threshold up to 180 just to make sure that we keep as many of those sharp corners as possible. And I'm going to bump up the Simplify curve back into the 90s. And I'm going to click OK. I did notice that there were a few spots where I got a rounded corner instead of a sharper corner, and that's why I said the sharper angles are a bit trickier, because there is usually a bit of manual editing we need to do. So I'm just going to come in here and edit these individually, and I'm using the anchor point tool to convert these points to corner points, and then I'm just going to align these and delete that one. And again, use the anchor point tool. I'll click on the handle here to convert that to a straight line. I saw over here the same thing happen, so I'm going to use the anchor point tool and click on those handles and just kind of manually fix these. And now I think the rest of this looks pretty good. Again, it's not a perfect method, but it's the best way that I have found so far to do this kind of sharp offset shadow that can actually be cut by a cutting machine. And finally, to make sure these designs open correctly in Cricut Design Space, I'm going to select all of these letters and choose Command or Control 8 on my keyboard, and that's going to make them a compound path, so they will open on a single layer in Cricut Design Space. And I'm going to do the same thing for these letters and press Control or Command 8, and that makes them a compound path. So now these are all ready to be saved as SVGs and open up into my cutting software. If you'd like to learn more about designing and selling SVG files for cutting machines, head over to cutfileclassroom.com, where you can find even more tutorials and grab a copy of my free designer's guide to error-free SVGs. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to drop any questions in the comments below. I'll see you next time.